say?
Yeah.
So, today we're going to move on to the next speaker, who is Ingrid Murphy. She works in the Cardiff Metropolitan University in the ceramics.
What they call it these days?
Yeah. And she recently had a grant from the Arts Council Wales, the Creative Wales Award, to develop some sort of augmented reality ceramic artworks.
Yeah.
She's going to present to us tonight.
Okay.
Yes.
Great. I couldn't have the lights off, I'm just better in the dark. Okay. I'm kind of here under double false pretenses really, because I don't really do interesting things with electricity. And I'm not talking about what was written on the website, but I'm hoping as I've come to fill in somebody else who couldn't come that your expectations are low. I'm going to just start with a little bit of context about my own practice, and I am feeling a bit sort of, very humbled by what Paul has shown us with his technology. I'm definitely more dork than bot in the sequence of the equation of things. So I'm a ceramicist. I'm an object maker. My passion is objects, but I've always been a bit of a gadget freak or a geek or whatever. So I'm going to start, please don't think I'm going to start with every piece of work I've ever done, but this is a piece of work I did when I was 18, and I showed because it's a bit of a touchstone in one sense, because it's about me trying to tell a story through a domestic object. I went to an art school where I studied ceramics. Ceramics was like the core relation of every art form that's ever existed, even though it is the second oldest profession in the world. And we should be proud of that. And I worked in I studied in an art school where everybody said, go back and make your blue stripy cups. We're going to do interesting things with art, and we're going to make cups. So I made this piece that venerated the blue stripy cup. You can see I was quite shit at making blue stripy cups. But the thing is, it's a kind of a touchstone in one sense to where my practice went, this kind of veneration of the domestic, I suppose, or this idea that the humble can actually deal with some of the most important things that we deal with. And essentially, I suppose I'm still a modernist at heart, and I still adore those essential things. And I kind of think that if I show you the first thing I made, you might just think I've made a little bit of progress in 25 years. So I've always just worked with this kind of notion of the still life, or the sort of veneration of the object. And I got into gold. Gold is really bad for you in terms of ceramics, because once you start using it, you never stop. It's more expensive than heroin. You should just go to heroin. It will be cheaper and actually probably healthier, because it's lethal. But once you start using it, it's pure alchemy and you can't stop. And I became very interested in the sort of hierarchy of materials as well, in the sense that gold is just so, well, it's up there, for God's sake. All those South American countries put all their cash reserves into gold. And ceramics is the lowest, clay is the lowest, it's underfoot, it's all of this. And I like playing with this idea of sort of material hierarchies, I suppose, and how we can change our perception of an object by illuminating it, by refracting it, and just taking things very simple and trying to change how we might perceive them, I suppose. I like things that, almost objects that can tell a story, things that have a bit of more of an allegorical or metaphorical meaning to them. This is work I did in a residency in China, using rice bowls and Chinese funnels to describe what I was really kind of experiencing when I was in China, using large domestic ware from this factory that I was in a residency in, and the rice bowl would pour the map of China in, and the big black bowl would have the map of China pouring out onto the floor and forming this gold map of China. And I suppose that kind of interest in how we can use objects that we're familiar with to convey meaning or convey a story or tell a narrative. I'm a kind of a pathological storyteller, and my stories grow, as everybody who knows me knows. And I think that I try, I suppose, in one sense, try and replicate that through a sort of, in the way I use objects in my work, and try and create something that, while it might tell a story, so there's a bit of kind of poetic resonance. This was another piece about the dams in China, using, and again using that material knowledge. This is a very toxic glaze that's banned in Europe, that is still readily available in China, God bless them. And it literally turns to liquid glass, so I could get these maps of China to literally bleed down the plate and form pools and then float these boats. I was near the Yellow River and it was becoming impassable through to the pollution in one sense, so I was using this kind of pollutant almost to make the piece. I had this hilarious experience that changed my way of thinking as well. I went to China with very short notice, a bit like turning up tonight, and I had no preparation. I made all of this work and I blew it up 3 times. Not once was enough, I blew the whole show up 3 times. So I still have to fill this huge museum space. So I decided I'm going to make myself a 32-foot porcelain ladder to get the fuck out of here. And, and sort of began to think about working a kind of different scale to what I'd maybe made before, or how materials that I could use that could communicate in a sense different things, but all the time just trying to in a sense represent the objects that we're familiar with. And then I did a piece which was a show curated by Kat, who signed over there for a Gathered World exhibition in Aberystwyth, and it was, this all makes sense in the end, I'm going somewhere with it really. This was a piece that Kat was curating, a wonderful show where we had to respond to domestic objects, or objects from the museum in Ceredigion, and I was in France at the time. I couldn't get to the museum, so I had these Limoges porcelain cups that I bought at a Brocon for 50 cents. And I used them every day to drink my tea out of, and I loved them. And I thought, well, I can make this story about these domestic objects. And I thought about, well, what is my relationship with a porcelain cup? So I began to think that when I was a kid, I used to go to my grandmother's every Wednesday, and my Auntie May would turn up, I was a great aunt, and she would read the tea leaves. And we would get out the good china, because you know porcelain is translucent, so she'd hold it up and she'd read the tea leaves, and I'd listen with great awe. And of course in 1970s Ireland, everybody had family in America, so it was a pretty safe bet for my Auntie May to tell me that there was a parcel coming from America in the tea leaves. So she'd say, oh, there's a parcel coming from America, and I'd go, really? And I'd wait, and the parcel never came. So I made this piece about this boat setting out from the cup. This is this little ship carrying my parcel, and it's coming from America. There's a map of America. And then it hits a terrible storm in the teacup here in the middle, and it sinks. As a child, every ship that sank, I'd say, oh, my parcel must have been on that. And that's it kind of coming to melt apart. This is a terrible image for an installation show. But I became very interested in just how, again, I could start playing with how these objects could be perceived, and I was using sort of putting them inside mirrored boxes and started creating these illusions. And I thought, well, you know what, it's not enough for me anymore. I want to kind of extend that frame of reference outside of the physical into something else. So I started looking at, I got the Creative Wales Award, and I started looking at haptic technologies. And you know, I've got to be honest, it didn't do a lot for me. Because I thought, oh wow, it's amazing. I don't have to worry about gravity, and I can take the tool out and all of this. And you know what, I'm not actually very good at ceramics, is the truth. I'm not a good modeler in porcelain. If you're going to be very good at haptic modelling, you need to be a good modeler, you know, to begin with. The technology doesn't necessarily make it easier. So I experimented with it, but I didn't find it was actually speaking to me hugely. I really admire the work of others in it, but I became much more fascinated in how the technologies I was looking at were enabling us to experience objects differently. And I thought, wow, this is interesting. I just remember reading a definition about augmented reality and about this ability to put a layer of meta-information onto anything. And I thought, put a layer of information on top of anything. That's very exciting. What will I do? So I have no kind of programming skills whatsoever, so I thought, well, I couldn't get my head around AR to begin with. So I started with QR codes. I thought, well, QR codes, they're interesting. I can make content that I can scan I can embed them into objects and see what happens. So I thought, okay, how would I do this? So I started with a Staffordshire flatback figure that I got as a present for my birthday, and it was kind of sat in the bedroom, and I thought, well, how could I explain the history of this figure through a QR code? And I was looking at this little couple, it was made in 1850, and I thought, I took a cast off it, made a replica, and then I thought, okay, how would they meet now? Well, they'd probably meet in Match.com. So I made dating profiles, fictitious dating profiles, well actually I made real dating profiles to begin with, which was a bit dangerous, for both of them. And you could scan each one and it would take you to their dating profile. So this is Staffordshire Lass. So I did this one night and I put it up on Match.com, and I went to bed and I left my phone next to the bed and it was going beep, 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 all night, emails coming in. I got up in the morning, she had something like 33 winks in the middle of the night, you know, usually about 3 AM. And I thought, oh, she's very popular, isn't she? And then I kind of, what I'd done is I'd put up in the 1850s, I answered the ads, you know, body type, haircut, all of this, that you have, the questions you have to, but then I sort of said interest, sports, maypole dancing, you know, and I think a lot of people didn't distinguish between pole dancing and maypole dancing at 3 AM. Whereas a boy, on the other hand, he didn't get many winks at all. But they've met now, and they're happy. And it was really interesting. What I didn't realise is, by putting I put the content onto my blog so I could kind of safeguard it rather than just being out on the net. And what's brilliant is I didn't realise by putting QR codes onto the pieces that actually I can track the buggers, and I know exactly where they are, because if somebody scans it, it tells me in the world where the piece is, which is great, which is started all other things thinking. And then I thought, well, you know, I've made a heterosexual version, and now I need one for the gay community. And I made this, which is called the Deer Hunters. I got this figure. I have to, if you can bear with me, because it's a Wi-Fi link, but I do have it, I think, loaded behind, if you can bear with me. And this piece arrived, I buy them on eBay very cheaply, these Staffordshire, and this one was meant to be a great butch thing, and they're painted by children, and sometimes the hand painting on them, oh no, that's me. We'll come to that. Oh, this might take too long to load, actually.
Have you got a connection?
No, but I thought I had it loaded behind. Not to worry. What it does is, you can have a look at it online, actually, if you go to my...
Can you reenact it?
Well, actually, what it is what I've done, it probably sounds more interesting, is I took the original Staffordshire figurine with the original hand painting on it, and I have done a stop frame animation, pixel by pixel, because that's the only way I know how to do it, to a soundtrack of You're Too Good to Be Through, I Can't Take My Eyes Off You, which is from the film The Deer Hunter. They start looking at each other. So the figure is completely stationary, but their eyes start meeting, and their blushing starts going, and then they blow each other a kiss, and one guy's very shy, and the other one's a bit more adventurous, and the deer's eye follows it back and forth and stuff like that. It's only a minute long, it's very simple. But I thought it was quite interesting to kind of move into more animated content. And then I did St. George slaying the dragon, and this one's got a dice head with QR codes in it, and as you scan each side of the head, it takes you to a different cultural interpretation of St. George, the myth of St. George, which I think is really fascinating because everybody wants to claim St. George, including the BNP. And in fact, he's living. You know, if you do, it's really funny because you start getting these objects and then you start actually researching about them, about the actual object, but also about what they're representing. And I've got, you know, it links to all different, this one links to other people's interpretations rather than my own. Stories from the Libyan press, or great things from the kind of Anglo Times, you know, sort of how we basically carve up history. And then this one was Little Red Riding Hood, and I had her for ages sitting on my shelf at work, and I was looking at her, and every day cycling and out to work I was passing the Occupy Cardiff protests outside the union offices, and I noticed that every day somebody was standing there with a different placard, and one thing it was kind of capitalism, and the next thing it was kind of, it seemed to stand for everything that somebody was against, and I thought it seemed to stand for everybody's fears. And I thought, well, what are our contemporary fears? Who is the wolf now to us? The wolf, how do we fight the wolf? And now we seem to fight the wolf by holding up a placard. So when you scan Red Riding Hood, what I've done is I've dropped her into all the screenshots of the Occupy protest. So every fear you have can be interesting. So the wolf, each piece goes to a different image as you scan it, and then this one was quite an interesting one because it's a murder scene. Can you imagine? You'd make a Staffordshire figurine of a murder scene and have it on your mantelpiece. So lovely. But the interesting thing about playing with histories in a sense is this object would have been made and you would have won it as a prize at fairgrounds. And, you know, oh, darling, I've hit 3 coconuts off the coconut shine, here, take this murder scene as a token of my love. But what's fascinating is when you actually research it, and then you can actually embed the subsequent narrative into it, is that these two men, for very different reasons, changed history. And it's their stories that become very fascinating because it's called The Murder of Thomas Smith, and this guy, William Collier, killed Thomas Smith. William Collier was a poacher, Thomas Smith was a really wealthy landowner, and it changed the law so that landowners could now shoot poachers on sight, so they couldn't set their dogs on them and kill them. But also, when they went to hang Thomas Collier for the murder, the rope broke, and he wasn't killed, and everybody was baying for his life. And as soon as the rope broke and he was staggering around all days, they said everybody started shouting for clemency. Because nobody wanted to see him hung again, and then they rethreaded the rope and they hung. And you kind of think, oh, there's that myth, everybody believes that if the rope breaks, the man's let off. But you know, they just changed the law that no more hangings were allowed in public. And but those two things happened well after this event was made, so you can kind of become interesting, I suppose, with how you can tell the history of an artifact. And then I started looking at this was a speaker form to be made for. I was interested in how sound and objects, rather than just looking at how we could present them visually, how could we present objects about sound or link a different type of perception. So the slide was for Metasynth, where you just insert form and you can turn image or object into sound. This is me. So I got hooked on gramophones, casting gramophones. So I made this house. I wanted to make an object that had an idea of how we can associate different sensations, I suppose, with an object, and I made this simple house to represent home. Then I started thinking about how can you collect data with an object, and I thought, oh, pinhole camera. Aha. So I turned my house into a pinhole camera, and then I took it. I live in different homes in France and here in Ireland, and I took it to various homes and began to record my home with the actual object. And then I actually was trying to make lots of different domestic objects into pinhole cameras, made a teapot into a pinhole camera very quickly, where you have, through the steam hole, you have to tilt it on its side to take an image because of the wide angle, and people kept putting it up right. You know, I was kind of doing it all surreptitiously, trying to capture, in a sense, that environment. I also put a recording device into it, because then these innocuous objects begin to capture, in a sense, the environment around it. And if we link to this, if it was to link, it's got a Wi-Fi link that isn't operational now, but it'll take you to a little film of the images that this object has taken, and I've made QR codes that will actually sit on there, which will just, as you scan, take you to the images of that object, and each window takes you to a different home takes you to the images of that different home. So it becomes a very kind of, obviously quite a personal piece, but this idea of one sense of home. And then moving on quickly, I decided to try and do something with augmented reality, and I had this quote that I've always loved, that I had in my dissertation as a student, which says, it's by D.H. Lawrence. It says, "Things men have made by wakened hands and put soft light into through years of transferred touch. For this reason, all things are beautiful." And it's this idea, I suppose, in one sense, if you work as a material artist, if you work with haptic things in the sense of you're touching them all the time, you do feel that we embody something in what we touch. So I started, I think this should play, trying to make markers of how, so I used the quote, "Things men have made by wakened hands," as the markers, and then trying to use embedded film. I started looking at all the way of doing it with 3D modelling, and I just didn't like the graphic feel of the 3D modelled augmented reality. It just wasn't working for me. And I went to Seville and I was looking at these paintings by Ribera, and this is a lovely painting of Saint Rufina, who's the patron saint of potters, holding her pot, and I thought, I love that kind of Spanish painting of flesh with that strong chiaroscuro. So every object I made that I wanted somebody to hold and experience and have a kind of a haptic experience at the same time, have an augmented experience, if I made it, it didn't work. I found nobody wanted to hold my objects, because why would you? And I found that in the house I have a fantastic collection of ceramics, and one object that everybody kept picking up was this very old wood-fired French jug. It's even got €8 written on it in pencil, it's broken. It's a jug that's a complete palimpsest of how it was made. You can see where the potter wired it off or stuck it on the wheel. You can see that it got knocked and hit. It has its history on its surface. And everybody came into the house, picked it off the mantelpiece and handled it, and I thought, you know, I've got this object already. I don't need to go and make it myself. So I scanned it and got it virtually, and then what I wanted to do was actually film every maker I knew, as many as I could, handling the object. How did they actually handle it? I became absolutely fascinated about how people kind of see with their hands, in a sense, and how by watching, I was making a little film for this maker course that I'm running in Howard Gardens, and I was filming everybody's hands, and I just became absolutely fascinated seeing the intelligence people have in their hands. And I wanted to try and capture this in the film, and I wanted other people to try and experience it in a much more, that's me trying to get the marker to work. So I made this film, I lit it very kind of dramatically, so it looked a bit more like a painting. And I think this is just, I've got it here and I can show how it works, but because it's a bit tricky. As soon as you show the marker to the screen, the film begins to run where your hands are. And that's why I wanted to talk after Paul, because it's that sort of strange thing that you suddenly, I was doing it, and interestingly I know whose hands they all are, but you're handling a replica. They're handling the original. I made a replica, and as you handle it, particularly if it's in the same scale, it becomes a very different experience, and you begin to look with your fingers, because you stop looking at this because you're transfixed by yourself being in the big screen and things like this, you know. And it suddenly becomes a very different kind of phenomenological experience of the object in a way. Especially when I start to see my hands becoming Claire Kinning's hands, and I go, gosh, she's got much more skillful hands than me. And all these people that you start to see the different scale of their hands and how they actually approach it. And what I've done here is I've made a replica, and I've made it a gold replica, because the next stage of the project is that I get as many people as possible to handle this object. And the gold is fired very low, very soft, so that as we handle it, it will tarnish, it will come off. And I want thousands of people, literally, to handle this object, so that as it gets handled, it will go darker and darker. The gold will come off, the luster will die. Let's see, where is it? Get that out. And
Do you want the light on for the...
it should work. We'll try. It was working earlier. Yeah.
Just one thing, Paul, I know Phil needs to get off about 20 minutes, but the clock on Ingrid's computer is not quite right, I think.
Oh no, it's not. It's
that
way
late.
ahead. It's way ahead. Here it is. Oh. Oh, it was working fine earlier when I was sat down over there.
It's okay, this is a speaker.
It is, isn't it? Any questions on any of that when I'm fiddling with this?
Are you recording the people handling it while they...
That's what yeah, I mean that's what I've got to do. I've got slight issues of the symmetry of my marker causes the image to flip 90 degrees one way or the other, so I need to kind of make it asymmetrical. Okay, we should, maybe we'll need light here now. Here we go. Oh yeah, it's flipping. So, but in one sense, what I'd like to do is I came across after I'd done this a fantastic project in the Netherlands where they worked with, and of course when I get my marker a bit better sorted, you find, but you get the idea anyway. But which was used to kind of explore an ancient collection of sgraffito ware and how they could embed all the histories in it, and kids could hold it up and basically interact with it in a haptic way. So if anybody wants to have a go afterwards, you're more than welcome. Any other questions? No? Stunned. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks, Ingrid.